In today's podcast, you'll learn some vocabulary and expressions connected to polyamory and swinging so that you'll be able to talk about this topic in English. We'll also let you know our opinion on this subject, and hopefully you'll also tell us yours. Welcome to
Aprender Inglés with Reza and Craig.
Hi, I'm Reza.
And my name's Craig.
And with more than 50 years of teaching between us, we'll help you improve your English and take it to the next level. Well, my friend, how are you feeling?
I'm feeling a little bit anxious, to be honest, because we haven't really spoken about this topic before, and I'm not sure how it's going to go, but we'll see. Never let it be said that we're not adventurous enough to speak about different, maybe difficult, touchy subjects, and we'll see how people react to it. And on that note, on that topic, on that subject of how you react to our podcasts, we're nearly at episode 500. Today is episode 497, and we would like to know what has been your favourite podcast episode so far. So why not send us a message and tell us, and we will include your message in episode 500. You can do that by going to speakpipe.com, speakpipe.com/Ingles podcast, and there you have 90 seconds to talk about your favourite podcast episodes. And on episode 500, Reza and I will also share our favourite podcasts with you.
Let's get started with a voice message from an old and loyal friend of the podcast, Mamen from Badajoz.
Hi Reza and Greg, I'm Mamen from Badajoz. First of all, I want to express my gratitude to you for the episode about your piece of advice English speaking exams. I listened to it the day before of my speaking test. You helped me a lot. In the end, I passed it. I've started the second B2 English level course at the official language school, and this level is very hard and I don't have enough time to study. For this reason, when I listen your podcast, it suits me great. By the way, a good idea of episode of Saint James Way. I strongly recommend both of you to make it. It's an incredible experience. Kisses from Badajoz, just the way Reza likes to hear. Bye.
Well, thank you, Mamen, and congratulations on passing the B1 exam. That's fantastic. Way to go, Mamen. And way to go was an expression from last week's episode 496, in which we spoke about different uses of way. And Mamen used one of the expressions. Did you notice, Reza?
Well, she talked about the St. James Way.
She did, and she also said, by the way.
Oh, I missed it. Oh, very clever, Mamen. Craig spotted it, but I missed it. You see, it's such a common expression. There's so many common expressions with way that I hadn't noticed. Well done, Mamen. Well done.
And well done on passing the test, and we're really pleased that you've continued to study at B2 level.
By the way, Mamen, Badajoz is never far from my mind or my mouth. Yesterday, I had some delicious ham, which was egg corn fed de bellota iberico from Badajoz. Boy, it was good. It wasn't cheap, eh? It cost me an arm and a leg, but it was good. Wow, the best ham in the world from Badajoz. So I never forget you Pathenses down there.
I really loved your expression, I want to express my gratitude, Mamen. Well done with that. That's quite an advanced way of saying thank you. So very, very good there. I want to express my gratitude to you.
Mamen, just because we want to help you on your way to improving your English, I want to point out one little thing. You said, listen, your podcast. You forgot the word to. That old mistake which keeps coming back time and time again. Be careful. Listen to something. You listen to the podcast.
And if anyone has not yet heard our episode that Mamen spoke about St. James's Way, El Camino de Santiago, that was back in episode 492. So to listen to that, go to inglespodcast.com/492.
One other little thing, Mamen, you said that we should make it, the way of St. James, or the St. James Way. You mean we should do it. You said make. We should do it. If it's an activity, it tends to be do. And if it's manufacturing or making something physical, creating, it's make. So we should do it. Yeah, one day I hope we will do the way.
We should do it together. Now, polyamory and swingers. This isn't the first time we've spoken about sex. Obviously, we've spoken about sex many times, not necessarily on the podcast, but we did speak with a good friend of ours, an ex-colleague, teacher Bea, English teacher Bea, back in episode 183. So if you would like to learn some more general vocabulary on the topic of sex, listen to that episode. It's called How to Take Your Relationship to the Next Physical Level in English with our friend Bea. So that's episode 183.
As Craig just said, yeah, we have spoken about sex a lot. Doing it's another thing. Craig and I have spoken about many things, but we haven't done all the things we've spoken about. And for me anyway, that includes polyamory and swinging. I've never actually done it, but I'm about to speak about it. But as Craig has pointed out before, not knowing anything about a topic has never stopped us from speaking about it, right, Craig?
Absolutely not. We've spoken about many things we know absolutely nothing about. So here we go. Let's start with one of the words we've already mentioned,
Sorry, Craig, can I interrupt you just for a minute? Just give me a second. Yeah. Okay, yeah, I thought just to get in the mood, I would do this podcast completely naked. That might give people more a feeling of the kind of swinging atmosphere, right? So, shall we do this podcast completely naked?
Would anybody know? Would anybody know if we were
would
or
anybody
weren't?
care? If they could see us, they'd probably switch off. So no. Okay, I'll put my clothes back on. Sorry about that.
I wouldn't worry about a little thing like that, Reza. Polyamory. The practice, what is it? Well, it's the practice of engaging in multiple romantic or sexual relationships with obviously the knowledge and the consent of everybody involved. So you are expanding your sexual partners, and that's where the poly comes in, because that means more or various. And amory, you might notice there, amour, the French amour, love. So, yeah, that's the meaning of polyamory.
Just to point out that polyamory is a noun. If you wanted to make an adjective, it would be polyamorous, ending O-U-S. So polyamory is the noun. Another noun, which is very similar, is polyfidelity. I'm sure you probably know the word fidelity. Polyfidelity is a type of polyamory involving a group of people who are sexually exclusive with each other. That means they only have sex with each other, but in a group, but not anyone outside the group. So they have a kind of fidelity. They're faithful within the group. They don't have sex with anybody outside the group, but they can have sex with anybody they want inside the group. So it's a kind of defined or limited polyamory, and that's called polyfidelity.
Polygamy, Polygamy, means having more than one wife or husband at one time. Polygamy. And if you are a polygamist, IST, then you have more than one wife or husband. And Reza, you put this fact in our notes here. I did not know this, but polygamy is in fact legal in over 40 countries. So that got me curious, and I Googled which ones. But the main ones, India, Malaysia, the Philippines, and Singapore, they recognize polygamous marriages, but only for Muslims, which I found interesting.
Ah, that I didn't know. Aha. So if you're a Christian, a Hindu, a Buddhist, you can't be a polygamist in those countries.
Nope.
Wow. What I did know, and I guess many of our listeners probably know as well, is that the majority of the countries where polygamy exists are Muslim, but it exists then in some non-Muslim countries, but chiefly for Muslims.
Exactly. And another interesting fact I found, Sweden, of course, the country that has quite a reputation for being very open-minded, they recognize polygamous marriages when they're performed abroad. So that you can't legally marry more than one person in Sweden, but if you come from another country to live in Sweden, they will accept you and say, yes, okay, you have 6 wives, that's fine.
Have you ever met a polygamist?
Not knowingly. Maybe I have and they haven't told me, but no, I don't think I have. Have you?
I have actually. It's quite a funny story. It was a student I had when I used to teach at Queen's University in Belfast. We had quite a lot of foreign students, and some of them were from the Middle East. And I remember having a student, Mohammed he was called, not surprisingly, from, I think it was Kuwait, if I'm not mistaken. And let's say it was January, I can't remember exactly when, but let's say it was January when he told me that he'd just been back to Kuwait at Christmas and he had got married. And I congratulated him and said, oh, that's very good. Then round about April, May said, oh, I'm going to Kuwait again to get married. And I said, hold on a second. You told me you got married in January. He said, yeah, I did. This is my new wife. Really?
And how
I said,
long?
Have I misunderstood? He said, no, this is my second one.
So how much time had passed between the first marriage and the second one?
Well, just a few months, from what I could gather. Maybe he was lying, I don't know, but that's what he told me. That was going to be his second wife. And it just dawned on me, wow, he's a polygamist. Yeah, he's going to get his second wife.
What does it just dawned on me mean?
It's just dawned on me means that, I didn't realize it until suddenly the truth or the reality has hit me all of a sudden. Like, he's a polygamist. He does have 2 wives. It's not that his English is wrong. He had kind of like a B1 level of English. I thought, he doesn't know his English. No, his English was right. He did have 2 wives.
Interesting. Now, swingers are individuals or couples who engage in consensual partner swapping or group sexual activities. So swingers change partners. So what's the difference then, Reza, between a swinger and a polyamorist?
For me, they're pretty much the same thing, but swinger is a much older term. It's still used today, but nobody or not many people really spoke about polyamory back in the 50s and 60s when people started to talk about swingers. The word polyamory existed, but hardly anybody ever used it. But now it has become quite mainstream. You will hear it. So I would say the word swinger is a far older word. But for me, it's more or less the same. Although perhaps we could say that swinging is the idea of mainly couples who kind of, by mutual consent, exchange partners. So very often a swinger is someone who does have a husband or a wife or a steady partner. Not necessarily, but they often do. And people like that meet together and have sex with whoever they want. Whereas polyamory is far, far more open. It's not necessarily for couples. It could be a couple, could be someone who doesn't have a couple. It could be anybody. Would you say it's a bit less defined in polyamory?
Yeah, I agree. Swingers definitely sounds a lot more informal to me than polyamory. And I don't know if you've ever seen this. I've never been to any of these parties and I don't think I'd ever go. But swingers parties tend to be where your car keys go in a bowl in the middle of the table and then you take out somebody's car keys and that's the person you're going to have sex with. Have you seen that in films and movies?
I have, but it sounds like you know a lot of detail there. Are you sure you haven't accidentally been to one?
No, I haven't.
You accidentally drove to a place, parked your car and put some keys in a bowl. Could it have all been just a big accident, a big misunderstanding? Are you sure, Craig?
With my luck, I'd get the person who rides a bicycle. I wouldn't get or an e-scooter. But anyway, an open relationship, if your relationship is open, that means that the partners agree that you can have sex outside of your relationship. So that's an open relationship where you're free to have sex with other people.
So what we're talking about today is a question of fidelity or infidelity. Fidelity is being faithful. Faithful is an adjective. Or the opposite, being unfaithful to someone. Do you notice the different prefixes? Fidelity, the opposite is infidelity, I-N. Unfaithful, U-N, for faithful, U-N, un. There's no fixed rule. We wish there were a fixed rule to tell you which negative prefix goes before the letter F, for example. There's no such rule. Infidelity, but unfaithful.
We are going to interrupt this episode about polyamory to let you know how you can improve your English with us. We can help you in different ways, can't we, Reza? How can you help listeners to this podcast?
If any of you are interested in a one-to-one private class with me, I think I can help you. I can tailor the class to your needs. We can concentrate on whatever you want. For most people, that tends to be speaking, but if you feel that you would like to pay attention to reading, writing, grammar, vocabulary, whatever, we can do that according to your aims and objectives. So if you're interested, why not get in touch with me? You could drop me an email at belfastreza@gmail.com.
And if you're interested in improving your speaking fluency and your confidence when you interact and have conversations in English, then my conversation courses might be right up your street. We get together on Zoom, a small group of students who are motivated to improve their English speaking, and we have conversations, debates, discussions, and role plays, all focused on improving your ability to communicate well in English. If you'd like more information, send me an email. I'm craig@inglespodcast.com. And now let's get back to the podcast on polyamory and swingers.
So the last thing we mentioned was fidelity, or the lack of it, infidelity. If you are unfaithful, that means you're having an affair. So one thing is to be polyamorous. That means you have more than one partner, but openly, you haven't lied to anybody about it. Another thing is to have an affair. That means you're in a relationship or in a marriage, but without telling your partner you're seeing somebody else.
It's in secret, isn't it?
It's in secret. That's the bad way of doing it. That is not polyamory. That is good old-fashioned having an affair.
And going behind the back of your partner, so doing it in secret. Another expression or phrasal verb that I think is useful here is to sleep around. If you sleep around, then you have many different sexual partners to sleep around.
A word which is perhaps beginning to sound a little bit old-fashioned, but it's still used quite a lot. If a man is having an affair, the woman that he's having an affair with is his mistress. So if you hear about a man speak about his wife and his mistress, well, he's probably not likely to speak about it publicly very much, but his wife is the one he's married to, and the mistress is the person that he's having an affair with. But we don't, as far as I know, have such a word for when it's a woman having an affair. The man that she's having an affair with, there's no word for him, is there?
No, there isn't. There's no equivalent to mistress, which is strange. To play the field, we're not talking about sports here, although we could be, but in the context of this topic, to play the field is to have many different sexual partners. Reza, did you play the field when you were younger?
When I was younger, but I was never unfaithful to anyone. You can play the field without being unfaithful. And you can play the field being unfaithful. If you have a partner and you don't tell them that you're seeing other people, and you're playing the field, you're being unfaithful. But I played the field not much, but I did try to win the favors of some ladies, but I was never unfaithful. I never had two partners at once, ever. But I did try to play the field with limited success in my 20s, perhaps.
A word that I think is quite useful in this context is the word spouse. particularly useful if you're filling in a form and you see the word spouse. Well, what does that word mean? S-P-O-U-S-E. What's a spouse? Well, that is your husband or your wife, because husband and wife have gender connotations, obviously, man and woman. So your spouse, it could be a man, it could be a woman. It's a gender neutral word, which means the person you are married to. So if you see that on a form or somebody says to you, what's the name of your spouse? You know that means wife or husband.
Now, most relationships have boundaries. Even polyamorous relationships, there are boundaries, there are limits to what people accept. So it may be an open relationship, but for example, imagine you have a husband or a wife and you know that they see other people, but you don't want them to be in bed with the other person, your bed, when you come home from a work day, really tired and want a nap. You probably wouldn't allow that, I imagine. So even polyamorous relationships tend to have boundaries, like all relationships.
You can say, where do you draw the line? If you draw the line, then you are putting boundaries in place. And another interesting pair of words to look at, jealousy and envy. Now, even native speakers aren't too sure about the difference between jealous and a jealous or an envious person. Those are the adjectives. I'm jealous, she's envious. And the nouns are jealousy and envy. There is a small difference, so I think it's worth mentioning. If you are envious, then you have a desire for something another person has. I'm really envious of my neighbor's new Alfa Romeo car, for example. Jealousy is connected to a feeling of losing something or losing someone. And that's why you often hear, I'm jealous of the guy at work because I think he really likes my girlfriend. So you're frightened or scared that maybe you'll lose your partner because of somebody else. So that's why we often hear a jealous husband, a jealous wife, a jealous boyfriend, because it's connected often to relationships, the word jealousy.
Craig, do you think it's natural and acceptable and normal to have these feelings of envy and jealousy? Because it does say in the Bible, thou, an old-fashioned way of saying you, thou shalt not envy thy neighbor's wife. That's what it says in the good book, in the Bible. Thou shalt not envy thy neighbor's wife. Is that right?
I learned it a bit differently. I learned thou shalt not covet your neighbor's wife, which means lust after, want to sleep with, have sex with.
And what do you think? Is that a rule? Is that a commandment that we should all follow? So one thing is doing it, but the Bible says you shouldn't even think it. To think it is a sin. What about that?
Well, I think that's very difficult to control, isn't it? I mean, we have these feelings. I think sometimes the secret is not to act on them, but to keep them maybe suppressed and not to take action. So it's very, very difficult not to, especially when you're younger, not to covet or lust after or want to have sex with somebody else, even if you are in a relationship. I think that's a normal thought, isn't it?
Yeah.
Or is it just me?
No, I agree with you. I think that, what old Moses wrote down was a bit optimistic, to be honest.
He was shooting quite high there, wasn't he? Shooting for the stars.
But he was just the messenger, poor guy.
Just the messenger. Don't shoot the messenger. The next word is a French expression that you've included. What does ménage à trois mean?
A very nice pronunciation, by the way, Craig. C'est bon. A romantic relationship involving three people. If you speak any French at all, you would guess that, because trois is the French word for three. And it's often, though not necessarily strictly, but often we think of an established couple, maybe a husband and wife, or it may just be an unmarried couple, plus another person. So it's a little bit more old-fashioned, perhaps, than some of these other terms. There'll be the couple who already have been going out with each other or married for a year, plus the other person who's not part of the couple, and they're the ménage à trois. It conjures up, it evokes images of kind of slightly old-fashioned open sexual encounters. It's not a very modern kind of idea, is it?
No, and it's interesting that we took the French expression for it, and I don't think there's one in English that I can think of.
And it's the sort of thing, maybe I've been a bit obsessive and watching the wrong things, but many years ago, I used to be a huge fan of French film. Lately, I've kind of lost my taste for it a bit, but in my 20s and 30s, I was a really big fan of French film. And from what I've seen, French cinema of the 50s, 60s, 70s, to have a ménage à trois is almost de rigueur. It's pretty much obligatory. If there's a French film for the 50s, 60s, 70s, there's a very good chance that there's a ménage à trois in it. Would you agree?
I haven't seen many French films from that period, but it doesn't surprise me. I think the French have a reputation for being quite liberal in that respect. Speaking of three people in a sexual relationship, there's another word which I thought was only connected to the Chinese mafia, but apparently it also describes three people in a sexual relationship, and that's triad. And you found another word, didn't you, that means the same?
Yeah, I didn't know the word triad until I saw it in the notes, but I did know the word throuple, which is a play on words of couple, but a couple of three, so THROUPEL, a couple of three. So how would you define a triad or a throuple?
Three people who are romantically or sexually involved with each other. So in society, most people tend to be in couples, don't they? Just two people. But a triad or a throuple would be three people. And four people is called a quad, QUAD. Again, a polyamorous relationship with four people who may be romantically or sexually connected in various ways.
And I'd thought that was a motorbike with four wheels.
So did I.
Yeah. We need to get out more, Craig.
We need to, or stay in more. Definitely do something. A threesome or a foursome. Now, that's quite common. I've heard of that. That's sexual intercourse between three people. A threesome with SOME at the end of three. Or a foursome with four people involved in having sex.
Just to make a distinction between threesome and foursome and triad or quad, as Craig pointed out, triad and quad refers to a polyamorous relationship, whereas threesome and foursome is purely the sex.
Good point.
It could be with someone you've never met before nor care to meet again. So that would not be a triad. That you're not romantically involved. It's simply threesome or foursome. It's about sex only.
Yeah, I'm pleased you pointed that out. Absolutely true. Now, when you create a family, you build a home, you can use the word nest to describe the home that you've created for your partner and your children. A nesting partner, then, is a partner with whom one shares a home or living arrangements, a nesting partner. And when children grow up and they leave home, or we can say fly the nest or leave the nest, then the parents who remain in the house by themselves are often called empty nesters.
The next expression is a thing which has become fairly commonly known these days, but I'm sure nobody or virtually nobody knew of it 50, 60 years ago, a safe word. It's kind of like a kind of a password in a way. It's a prearranged word, or sometimes it can be a signal used during sexual or intimate situations, specifically to communicate that you want to stop or perhaps slow down. So imagine you're involved in some, let's say, unusual kind of sexual act. It may be slightly risky, even the sort of thing that some swingers get up to. But you need to have some kind of way of indicating that the other person's going too far, that perhaps they're hurting you, or you're just not enjoying it, or it's just not right. So there'll be a word or perhaps a signal that you say, and they know it in advance, so they know, okay, I've got to stop now. They're not pretending that they don't like it. They really don't like it because they said this word. That is the safe word.
That's quite common in sadomasochistic relationships, isn't there? Where there's a sadist who wants to inflict or cause pain on the other person. And there's the masochist who really enjoys receiving pain. And I remember a story once where a sadist and a masochist met together to have sex. And do you know what the masochist said to the sadist?
What?
Okay, what are you going to do to me then? And the sadist said nothing.
Very good. Very good. Make him suffer. That's good. Yes, so safe words are probably particularly associated with sex, which is going to involve a bit of pain. Craig, do you mind if I invent or even perhaps guess, I don't know, a safe word for you? I don't know if you really have a safe word, but I'm going to guess one. You ready?
Go on.
Well, it can be a word or it can be a short phrase. I reckon if Craig had a safe word, it would be Bourbon cream. Am I close?
Yeah, possibly. Yeah.
In case you don't know, listeners, the old listeners who's listened for a long time will know that bourbon creams are perhaps the thing which appeals to Craig more than anything else in God's green earth.
I think your safe word will be Spanish ham.
Yeah, might be. If I got time, Spanish ham from Badajoz, but it's quite a mouthful to say that.
So we had an expression in last week's podcast about different ways of using the word way. And I said to swing both ways. If a person swings both ways, that means it's a colloquial way to say that the person is bisexual. So, yeah, John, he's quite sexually liberated. He swings both ways. He sleeps with men and he sleeps with women. And if you want to hear more expressions using the word way, go back and listen to last week's episode 496. inglesepodcast.com/496.
Craig, did you know that an estimated 21%, that's quite a lot, of people in the United States have engaged in consensual non-monogamy? So monogamy is the opposite of polygamy. Monogamy is having one partner. So 21% of Americans have engaged consensually in non-monogamy at some point. So, in other words, their partner knows that they've had another partner. 21%, that's a lot. Does it surprise you?
No, I don't think anything surprises me about the US anymore. So that statistic doesn't surprise me at all. I think it might surprise me if it were connected to the UK, but not to America. Do you know anyone who's been involved in a polyamorous relationship?
I've met a couple of people over the years that I know of, but who knows, maybe there's people that we both know, but they never said it. But people who have said to me openly, only a few in my life, not many. I haven't come across many. And you?
Just one that comes to mind, a friend of mine who I obviously won't name, but he has been involved in many polyamorous relationships. And what is curious is that he has always lived alone. So he never got married, and I found that interesting. But just that one person comes to mind, although I suspect it's not something that is going to be the first topic of conversation when you meet somebody.
Right.
You have to know them pretty well, I think, for them to say that to you.
And Craig, what do you think could be the advantages as well as the disadvantages of polyamorous relationships?
Oh, that's a tough question. I don't know. Obviously, honesty would be an advantage because having an affair is a very horrible thing to do when the other person doesn't know about it. So being upfront, which means being honest about wanting to have sex outside the relationship, I think is a positive thing. And maybe it helps to keep the flame of sexual desire burning. Who knows? What do you think?
Yes, I reckon it can probably certainly give you a lot of physical satisfaction, because although having sex with the person you love and most want to be with and feel a special bond with in this world is a very important and fulfilling thing, let's be honest, after 10, 20, 30, 40, 50 years, you've been there and done that a lot. And, life needs a little bit of spice. So I can imagine physically simply the feeling of being with another person rather than the one partner all the time must be in a way good for you, you know? Even though you might do the same things with the other person, just the fact that it's another person probably feels different, and variety is the spice of life. What do you think?
Well, for me personally, I think jealousy would come in the way. I don't think I'd feel comfortable with that at all. So even though for some people it might be a good thing to do, for me it would never work, because I don't think I'd be able to live with the idea. I don't think I could, no. What about you? Would you consider one?
It's never presented itself up to now, but I would perhaps. I'm not totally closed off to the idea, but I think for me it's unlikely. It's unlikely. I can't imagine myself being in that position, but I don't completely...
Which position are you in? Which position are you not imagining?
Not any physical position, metaphorical, abstract position.
Oh, okay.
I don't rule it out, but I think it's unlikely. And particularly since, I'm no spring chicken. That means I'm not young anymore, and I haven't done it up to now. The idea of starting it when you're middle-aged is unlikely, I'd say.
Well, I don't know if I agree with that, because I think it's exactly middle-aged people who might be thinking about it, to spice up their bedroom a little bit. But anyway, as I said, it's not something I've seriously considered ever. But I think it's an interesting topic to explore, at least from an English perspective. But now it's your turn to practice your English. What do you think? We would love to hear your opinion on this topic. Do you think it's good for a relationship, or maybe not so good for a relationship? Why don't you send us a message and tell us what you think? Give us your opinion and practice the vocabulary that we've covered in this podcast. Also, we remind you that we're nearly at episode 500. So what has been your favorite podcast episode so far? We'd also love to get your opinion on that so that we can include your messages in episode 500. How can people send messages, Reza, by voice?
If you're going to record your voice, use the link we've got in the show notes to speakpipe.com/English podcast. And using that, you can leave a voice message of up to a minute and a half. If you want to write, you could send an email to craig@englishpodcast.com or me, belfastreza@gmail.com.
And we remind you that this podcast is sponsored in part by mansioningles.com, which is a free website where you can practice your English, especially if you're a Spanish speaker. And there are courses for sale on the website. You can visit the online store and see if you can find any paid courses that will help you improve your English. Go to store.mansioningles.net.
As always, we'd like to thank all of our Patreon supporters. And on the Patreon program, those sponsors donate as little as $1.50 per month to the podcast. And as a way of saying thank you for their donation, we give them instant access to the audio transcriptions of this podcast. If you're interested, why not follow the link in the notes? It's patreon.com/English podcast.
And unfortunately, we don't have time to thank you all individually for your support, but we really do appreciate it. We do, however, have time to welcome and thank our latest Patreon supporters who have joined us this month. And they are Abel, Pedro Carrillo, José María Rodríguez, Juan Miguel Marabel González, Miguel M.R., or Mr. Miguel, Aurora, and Raquel Muñoz Mayada. Special thanks to Alejandro, who is supporting us for more than the minimum of $1.50. Thank you to you and to everybody who is helping us by supporting this podcast on Patreon.
Craig, what have we got in next week's episode?
I'm pleased you asked, Reza. Next week we're going to talk about expressions that could be rude and impolite. Maybe you don't know that you could possibly offend somebody in English by saying a rude thing or an impolite expression. We will help you improve your politeness by giving you alternatives to things that you might already be saying. So join us next week for that. Thank you for listening this week. Until next time, it's goodbye from me.
And it's bye-bye from me.
The music in this podcast is by Pitts. The track is called See You Later.